In the video I released on September 8th, I talked about falling in love with New York City in high school, then applying to New York University for college, getting in there, and then ultimately moving from Wichita, Kansas to New York City in August of 2007. Now I want to talk a little bit about the apartment that I lived in for the entirety of my 12 years in New York. This story actually starts the summer before my junior year in high school when I decided that I really wanted a kitten. Despite the fact that our family was always a dog family, and at the time we had 4 dogs, 2 Great Danes, a Weimaraner, and a Cocker Spaniel. But I just was really convinced that I needed a cat and that I was a cat person. So when my parents went away for a weekend, I went and got a kitten behind their back. And because I was a spoiled little brat and the baby of the family, they didn't yell at me and tell me to go return it, which I couldn't do anyway. They just accepted this new reality that we had a cat named London who is now in our house. Got to December 15, 2006, when I officially found out that I was going to be going to NYU and moving to New York City. I realized that I wouldn't be able to take London with me because there was a no pet policy in the NYU dorms, so I had no options to bring him, but I couldn't leave him behind in Kansas. That would just break my heart. I was so bonded to him. So I started coming up with ideas, and the one that I landed on was that I needed an apartment in New York City. In a previous video that I released about my dad and I's relationship, which I'll link above, I talked about how he had a really entrepreneurial spirit and that he would latch on to ideas that I had and really run with them with me instead of just shutting them down prematurely. So when I had this idea about the apartment in New York City, I knew that I could pitch it to him strategically and it might actually go somewhere. So what I did is I said, Dad, look, it would actually be a better investment to buy an apartment in New York City than it would be to pay the dorm fees or to pay an apartment rental fee throughout the course of my time in college. And that way we could actually recoup the investment after I finished college. We could sell the apartment and you could actually probably turn a profit. So it'd be like I'd be living there for free the entire time. My dad bought it hook, line, and sinker, and he immediately started looking at properties every night after he came home from work. He became very obsessive about it and we talked about it nonstop. So the prospect of me getting this apartment, which would allow me to take my cat to New York City with me, was becoming much more likely. As I'm saying all this, it does seem really ridiculous because it was a really ridiculous proposition that I did. And it also makes it seem like we had a lot of generational family wealth that would just allow us to buy a New York City apartment on a whim. But as a reminder, that wasn't the case. My parents started a family dental practice in Wichita, Kansas, and worked really hard to make it a success. And that is how we accrued our wealth and attained upper middle class status in the Midwest. That's a big differentiator because we were not coastal wealthy, we were Midwest wealthy. So yes, we were well off, but it wasn't anything crazy. And my dad also was just someone who was willing to invest. He wasn't super risk averse at this time. And so he was open to this idea, just like he was open to the idea when I told him that he should really buy Apple stock in 2003 when I got my first Mac because I thought they were amazing products. So that ended up paying for my college. When the iPhone came out, he sold all of the Apple stock that I told him to get. And that's actually how I went to NYU without any student loans. The following spring, my dad and I took a trip to New York City and we went around with a real estate broker looking at properties. By the end of that day, we settled on the first one that we had seen, which was a condo in the financial district, and we put an offer in that day. They accepted it, and then that summer, my dad just went back and signed the paperwork, and then suddenly we just had an apartment in New York City, which is such a bonkers concept to me now, because I can't even afford to buy my own place. I am stuck renting. There is no way that I can even afford a down payment on a place in a major city like New York or LA. I'm sure I could get away with somewhere in the boondocks in the Midwest, but that's not where I want to be living. And so it is unfathomable to think that I would then have enough money to just on a whim get an apartment for my child in the biggest city and the most expensive city in the United States. That is nuts. I was so privileged at the time, which you may be screaming at the screen or thinking in your head, and it is so true. The amount of privilege was unbelievable. To think that as an 18-year-old, I would have a condo in the financial district in New York City to be my own for the entirety of college, if not beyond that. It is so unattainable for so many people. It would be unattainable to me now. I mean, so much has happened in my life and my family since my mom passed away. Like there is none of this familial wealth going around anymore. So I can't even lean back on that. I don't even have a safety net. With all that acknowledged, I have to stress how much that apartment meant to me. It did become my home. I lived there longer than I've lived anywhere else in my life. 12 years, and I made so many core memories there. That's where I came out to my parents. That is where I lived with my first boyfriend. That is where I wrote my first novel. That is where I wrote this book, Losing Linda May, a Cancer Caregiving Memoir. Everything was all in that apartment. In the first moment I included for September 10th in my book, I talk about this mural that is on the focal wall of the apartment, which is a map of New York City with all the land masses being in chalkboard paint. And over the many, many years, so many friends and family members and just strangers who had been in my apartment for parties had signed and drawn thing on that chalkboard wall. So it was really an encapsulation of my time in New York City up until that point. That mural wasn't something that I initially created right after moving in. Actually, at first, I had this Post-it note mural that I created that I then layered bubble wrap over to prevent my cats. Yes, cats plural, because after I moved to New York City, I got a second cat named Luxembourg because I was worried about London not having company while I was gone during the day. I was a crazy person when I was a young man. Anyway, so I created this Post-it note plus bubble wrap mural, but then I got into a relationship and he decided to move in with me. And as a gesture towards this future that we were building together, we took down the Post-it note wall and then we created this mural together to kind of signify that this was our space because he was moving in with me versus us moving into a place together. I'm going to read part of the passage that I included for this moment in my book. After chugging a glass of water, I scanned the mural of New York City made with chalkboard paint on the focal wall of the apartment and the contributions that have been added over the years with various colors of chalk. The letters of Emily's initials, EOB, are outlined individually by pink boxes. Leah referenced her doppelganger, the real Marcel Visage. James scrawled, "Hi though, knows how to be a heartbreaker." Odes to other past romantic relationships of various significance coexist with more recent partners like Javier, who listed out the words of Spanish I would string together to make him laugh. The majority of my family also left their marks, names from home and city butting against one another. Perhaps I will paint over the mural once I return and officially restart my life. How can I move forward with the past so prominently featured? Then again, how can I destroy mementos from people I love or have loved, platonically or romantically? How could I possibly erase Mom was here when I do not know if she will ever return? I shake my head, rejecting the idea. The wall stays, at least until Mom visits the city again. Even though this video makes me a little uncomfortable to release and put out into the world because I really don't want the financial status of our family at the time when I was going through college to really impact how people are reading my book and the emotions that are involved with being a primary caregiver for a loved one who has cancer. But I did think it was important to put out there to address some questions that might be in the readers' minds, like how is this kid affording to live in New York City in Manhattan while working as a receptionist at a high-end acupuncture center? And how could he keep that apartment while just going home to be a primary caregiver for his mom? So I hope it does that. But most importantly, I hope I captured how significant this space was to me, because it wasn't like I had just moved in a year ago prior to this time in the book. I had lived there for 8 years and I had so many memories there. It was a part of who I was. So keep that in mind as you continue reading the book, because it will come into play a little bit later on. The next video I'll be releasing will be on September 11th, and I'll be talking about when I initially found out the news that my mom had non-Hodgkin lymphoma. So hit subscribe, leave any questions in the comments. The link to my book is in the description, and I will see you all then.